In the north of England, a bunch of computer programmers dreamt of a similar future.
Well, we love J.G. Ballard, and in fact, you know, Roxy had a song to HB about Humphrey Bogart, and we had a song for J.G., which was about J.G. Ballard.
The Future were a bunch of sci-fi nerds from Sheffield. They formed in '77 and played only synthesizers.
When I bought my Korg 700S in 1976, it was the first time there was a monophonic synthesizer which you could do stuff with, which was kind of domestic level, entry level in terms of price. It was 350 quid, I think. And I remember distinctly thinking at the time, I was a computer operator, and there was a decision day where it was either buy a second-hand car and learn to drive, or go and buy this monophonic synthesizer. And that proved to be quite a fateful day, because I still can't drive, but I still got that synthesizer.
This is a Mini Korg 700S, and was sort of the first affordable synth. A fantastic machine, completely eccentric.
Listen to the voice of Buddha.
They give you a book of patches with it, and because it was Japanese, that there would be things like Synthy Cat or Funny Frog, you know, and you can't follow why it's doing what it does, but it sounds great.
Usually with a synthesizer, you can get it to do something for you that you don't have to be manually good at all. So we use these things, and you can press a switch on them, and they'll do things for about 10 minutes. It's quite interesting. If you've got a tape recorder, you can put it down, put something next to it, and it'll sound all right.
The day that I joined the band, Martin came round to my house, and he had two records under his arm. One was Trans-Europe Express, and one was I Feel Love. And he said, "Look, we can do this." I think that was his actual phrase.
We loved all that stuff. I mean, like the concept albums that George and Rhoda did with Donna Summer. We used to play those continuously. And this wasn't some kind of post-gay, ironic thing. It's just because they sounded great and interesting, and you're never really sure what the next set of sounds coming up was going to be.
I Feel Love just didn't sound like any record that had been before. It came on the radio, and you couldn't quite believe what you were hearing. It was hypnotic, but it was driving.
Moroder's Moog Music was the disco single of '77. Its success would set the template for the future of the future.
We were, in fact, much more influenced by Moroder than we were by Kraftwerk. Everyone, ever since anyone that knows we use synths, "Oh, you sound like Kraftwerk, don't you?" Well, we use the same instruments, so some of the sounds are a bit the same. We never really wanted to be Kraftwerk. We wanted to be a pop band.
We wanted to embody a sense of futurism without being so literal. And it just so happened a friend of ours, he had bought for him this science fiction board game called Star Force. And it was prodigiously tedious. I mean, it was real geek stuff. And it was impenetrable. You couldn't play it. There was the Rise of the Human League or something. And we thought, the Human League, that is such a cool name.
No future, they say.
The Human League set out to make electronic pop for the modern city.
Now is calling. The city is human. Blind you take hope, you're no joke. So your time is too big, but come soon. We've had it easy, we should be glad. High-rise living's not so bad.
The Human League had a totally different spin on synthesizers, where it was much more like this bright, technocratic optimism.
I'd say most of the brightness came from Martin. Martin's very optimistic, and if anyone's moaning about anything, Martin will go and write a song in the opposite direction. I think I felt a bit gloomy about the concrete jungle and everything, which is ridiculous because I'm a townie. You know, I gravitate towards concrete. If you put me in the country, I would just find the nearest town and go, and I'll be sitting in a bar quite quickly.
Blind you take hope, you're no joke. So your time is too big, but come soon.
Unfortunately, British pop music wasn't quite ready for a synth-led group of futurists just yet. But in 1978, the Human League weren't the only group experimenting with electronics in Sheffield.
This is the old Salter Line Art College, which used to be part of Sheffield Polytechnic in the 1970s. I believe the Human League also played this very place for their first ever live show in Sheffield. Cabaret Voltaire did perform in this very room.
Yeah, I mean, we just thought there was nothing for us, you know. I mean, it was all kind of bloated super groups and progressive bands who weren't even from the same kind of social backgrounds, you know. They were probably public school educated, whereas I think, you know, most of the scene in Sheffield was pretty solid, kind of working class. You'd find little bits of interesting music within perhaps some of the prog rock stuff where there'd be a weird little synth break. But then, you know, once you kind of start to discover all the German bands, you realise that there were entire albums that were made of electronics.
Whilst the Human League dreamt of pop, Cabaret Voltaire were anything but, using electronics to explore Sheffield, a city torn between the past and the future.
I remember watching loads of science fiction things in the 60s, like Doctor Who and things like Quatermass. And all these kind of strange things seem to happen in kind of old gasworks or industrial environment. There was another worldliness about it. You might see an alien or a giant blob creeping across the floor, glowing bright green from radioactivity.
Very arty group. Obviously, their name echoes Dada. They were really into William Burroughs and his ideas of like control and surveillance. They actually used quite a lot of guitar, but it was so heavily processed, it didn't sound like rock and roll guitar. It sounded more like a synthesizer. They also put synthesizing type effects on the voice, which is probably one of the most disturbing things they did. You know, you have a guy singing, but it sounds more like a Dalek than, you know, a human being.
At night time, you'd hear distant booming noises, which, you know, would probably be something like a drop forge or steam hammer or something. You certainly knew that you were on the edge of, you know, heavy industry.
Everything in their music was kind of alienated, and, you know, the music that comes from people who are kind of divorced from any kind of natural life, any natural rhythms, the music for a kind of hostile environment.
If I've ever been asked to explain that movement, I always call it the alienated synthesists. And, you know, Throbbing Gristle, Cabaret Voltaire, Joy Division, who were a little bit less obviously synthy. Everyone was sort of like that. We were all going around in long coats from second-hand shops and saying how terrible things were with a synth.